G'day guys, welcome back to another one of Nathan's commentary videos on art, culture, society, politics and everything in between. Don't forget to give it a like and a share. We're building up to a huge new book through these, which we're going to be revealing in the next few coming weeks. In the meantime, Nate wants to talk to you about the CIA.
Yeah. Well, look, I've been around a lot of radicals in my life since I was in my 20s, and my mother's pretty radical. And there's always, strong anti-American sentiment, especially towards American foreign policy and war policy. And I've been involved with communist groups and socialist groups, and there's a strong anti-American narrative. Particularly around wars, Vietnam, Iraq War, all these historical wars that the Americans keep instigating. So through that, I came to have a very extensive interest in the Central Intelligence Agency. And I suppose I first learned about the CIA in movies. I think of the movie True Lies, where he's a CIA agent. That's probably one of the first places that I saw the idea of the CIA presented to me in cinema. And over the years I've had a very oppositional view to the CIA. I've felt they're a very corrupt organisation, and that is evidenced in history in their, illegal experiments in mind control, and other things that they've done throughout the years. And I also have the view that historically the CIA has been a very right-wing organisation. I think positions like high authority policing positions tend to draw authoritarian right-wing thinkers. And so I've always had this interest in the CIA. I've always viewed them as a nemesis. I don't know who I think I am to think that I should have the right to view the CIA as my enemy, but I do. They're a big formal organisation with years of history, and I'm a 37-year-old guy who has declared that I am the enemy of the CIA. It sounds a bit bonkers to me. But that's how I feel. So when the CIA released a whole bunch of material onto the internet under the Freedom of Information Act, I was very interested in it. It's important to note that all the information that was declassified onto the internet 7 years ago has been available in one of the libraries in America. You could access these records since 1996, so it's not new information. It's just more easy to access now that it's on an online database, and it allows a guy like me in Australia, in my living room smoking bongs, to sit there and scroll through historical CIA records. So when those documents were published onto the Freedom of Information electronic reading room about 7 years ago, I was very enthusiastic to read them, and I read many of them, and I read hundreds of them. And so I've learnt some things about the CIA that have changed my perspective on what the organisation is. So I used to have the view that the CIA had an agenda, right? So this is the first point I'll address. The view that the CIA has an agenda, or that the CIA is an organisation with an agenda to take over the world. Now, I don't have that view anymore. I certainly think there have been elements within the CIA who have conspired to bring harm to others and to control America and the world, and there have been different factions. But what I've come to realise is the agenda of the CIA. See, I've got a more realist view of how things work now, and I understand now that the agenda of the CIA at any given time depends on who the director is and who is in the high-ranking positions in the CIA. It also depends on who is in the presidency and the position of the president, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican, left or right. So it's dependent on all these factors. So I've abandoned this idea that there is a set CIA agenda to take over the world. I think the organisation is a bit more complicated than that. I think broadly America does have an agenda. They talk about freedom and democratic values, and that's their broad agenda. But even the American agenda is in flux, and all agendas of all establishments, what I've come to realise, are in flux, dependent on who is in the leadership position at any given time. And I've also realised through my research into freedom of information that, I used to have this view that the CIA is not properly held to account for crimes they have committed against humanity throughout history. Now, I still maintain they have not been properly held to account. It's like when all this mind control stuff come out, nobody's been held to account. I think I was reading at one point that some people, I'll go and look at it again and go and look at it yourself, But I think some of the victims of the PSYOPs mind control experiments have actually been compensated for the experiments that were illegally conducted on them. But overall, nobody has said, these people orchestrated these illegal experiments, these people must go to jail. I'm not aware of anyone who's gone to jail because of corruption around mind control experiments in the CIA. But what I've come to realise is the CIA does answer to the Congress and to the Senate Select Committee and to the establishment of America, and there are processes for Washington and the American government to regulate the behaviour of the CIA. So I've come to have a bit of a more serious understanding of how it works. They are held accountable. They do have to report to other people, and there are checks and balances to ensure that they are conducting themselves properly. So that's what I've come to realise, and that's part of what freedom of information is. There's all this material on the internet now under the Freedom of Information Act, which is highly damaging to the reputation historically of the Central Intelligence Agency, and I'm sure that they would prefer that the information still be secretive, because some of it is incredibly scathing of their behaviour in that era in the 50s and the 60s, yet they have absolutely no control to, I'm sure heads of CIA, what depends on the individual. I mean, there's many people in the CIA, but I feel like the heads of CIA, surely they'd prefer that information to still be classified because it's damaging towards their reputation. But regardless, it's not classified. It's made public through freedom of information, which is a check and balance to ensure that the system regulates itself and that the CIA is held into check for what they're doing, and they have to answer to all sorts of different bodies and inquiries to ensure that they're conducting themselves properly. I used to have this view they just sort of went around and did all this stuff, incited all these wars and funded these dictatorships and smuggled drugs and did all this stuff, and that nobody was ever questioning what the CIA was doing. That's not true. The CIA comes under heavy scrutiny regularly. So the idea that the CIA are just are allowed to freely go about and do as they wish without any regulation is false. They are regulated and they are held to account. So I don't, and looking at the CIA and what they've done historically around mind control and some of their other crimes, I think at times there have been an agenda, but again I want to reinforce that there is no set agenda. I don't agree anymore that there is this set agenda. And I've also learned, because I've actually had communication with one woman who's worked for the CIA extensively, and she's a nice woman, and I don't know what her values are or what her political position is, but she certainly wasn't rude to me. She comes across to me just guts, like a human being who was kind enough to give me an answer to my inquiry. And I've looked into a number of other, Russell Targ, Harold Puthoff, other scientists that have worked for the CIA, these men who worked in the PSYOPs Stargate program, and they're not bad people. So I think to say everyone blanketly at the CIA is a deceitful, conniving, right-wing fascist scumbag is a false thing to say. There's a variety of people who work at the Central Intelligence Agency. They have a variety of values, and some of them very much believe in what they're doing, and that's what I've come to realise. A lot of these people, even if I disagree with their view of how the world should be, some of them very much believe that their view is correct, and they believe they are protecting the world, and they believe they serve a righteous cause. So I've loosened up a bit on my criticisms of the Central Intelligence Agency as I've learnt more about how the organisation works. Now I see it as a system that is in flux with various people involved who have various different views, and there are checks and balances, and they are held accountable. And but in general, I think these secretive agencies get away with a lot that we don't know about, and I still feel there could be more accountability because there have been crimes committed. But there is some degree of accountability for people who work in the CIA. You can't just say, I'm a CIA agent, I'm going to go and kill a bunch of people and get away with it because you're a CIA agent. And what I've come to realise is, some of the issues that these people deal with are serious matters. Like, before I started looking into the inner workings of the CIA and realising how many of these different departments there are and the strategic issues they deal with and the global geopolitical issues that they deal with and how they see themselves in the global community, I realised, you can't make just broad blanket statements against the CIA. You've got to understand this is a sophisticated thing that is happening in the American military establishment, and there are threats. So I've just come to have a view that it's a bit more of a complicated matter than to blankly come in and brandish the Central Intelligence Agency as a completely corrupt organisation. It's a bit more complicated than that, and ideology comes into it, and politics and views and things, many things that are very subjective. But certainly, I've come to have those realisations about how the Central Intelligence Agency works. So I think that's a more mature view of how security works in general. So certainly my research into freedom of information has taught me that, and I encourage you to do your own research into freedom of information in the CIA if you're interested in understanding how the organisation works. So drop a comment in the comment section about your views on security work and the security community and policing, and whether we need these organisations and whether they need to be held more to account for their crimes in the past.